The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Give a like if you enjoy this content. Chapter 41. The dawn was just beginning to whiten the trees, bushes, and boulders scattered in the fields, when the hired guide, walking beside Durand's horse, stopped and said, "Permit me to rest, knight, for I am out of breath. It is thawing and foggy, but it is not far now." "You will conduct me to the road, and then return," replied Durand. "The road will be to the right behind the forest, and you will soon see the castle from the hill." Then the peasant commenced to strike his hands against his armpits, because he was chilled with the morning dampness. He then sat on a stone, because this exercise made him still more breathless. "Do you know whether the Count is in the castle?" inquired Durand. "Where else could he be, since he is ill?" "What ails him? People say that the Polish knights gave him a beating," replied the old peasant, and there was a feeling of satisfaction in his voice. He was a Teuton subject, but his Mazovian heart rejoiced over the superiority of the Polish knights. He presently added, "Hey, our lords are strong, but they have a hard task with them." But immediately after saying this, he looked sharply at the knight, as if to convince himself that nothing bad would happen to him for the words which he had heedlessly let slip, and said, "You, lord, speak our language. You are no German?" "No," replied Durand, "but lead on." The peasant arose and again began to walk beside the horse. On the way, he now and then put his hand into a leathern pouch, pulled out a handful of unground corn, and put it into his mouth, and when he had thus satisfied his first hunger, he began to explain why he ate raw grains, although Durand was too much occupied with his own misfortune and his own thoughts to heed him. "God be blessed for that," he said. "A hard life under our German lords. They lay such taxes upon grist that a poor man must eat the grain with the chaff, like an ox. And when they find a hand mill in a cottage, they execute the peasant, take whatever he has. Bah! They do not pardon even women and children. They fear neither God nor the priests. They even put the priest in chains for blaming them for it. Oh, it is hard under the Germans. If a man does grind some grains between two stones, then he keeps that handful of flour for the Holy Sunday, and must eat like birds on Friday. But God be blessed for even that, because 2 or 3 months before the harvest, there will not be even that much. It is not permitted to catch fish, nor kill animals. It is not as it is in Mazowsha." The Teutonic peasant complained, speaking partly to himself and partly to Durand, and meanwhile they passed through a waste country, covered with limestone boulders, heaped with snow, and entered a forest which looked gray in the morning light, and from which came a sharp, damp coolness. It became broad daylight. Otherwise it would have been difficult for Durand to travel along the forest road, which ran somewhat uphill, and was so narrow that his gigantic battle horse could, in some places, hardly pass between the trunks. But the forest soon ended, and in a few paters they reached the summit of a white hill, across the middle of which ran a beaten road. "This is the road, lord," said the peasant. "You will find the way alone now." "I shall," replied Durand. "Return home, man." And putting his hand into a leather bag, fastened in front of the saddle, he took from it a silver coin and handed it to the guide. The peasant, accustomed more to blows than to gifts from the local Teutonic Knights, could scarcely believe his eyes, and catching the money, dropped his head to Durand's stirrup and embraced it. "Oh, Jesus Mary," he exclaimed, "God reward your honor. God be with you. God's grace be with you. Szczytno is before you." Then he once more bent down to the stirrup and disappeared. Durand remained on the hill alone, and looked in the direction indicated by the peasant, at a gray, moist veil of fog which concealed the world before him. Behind this fog was hidden that ominous castle, to which he was driven by superior force and misery. It is already near, then, and what must happen, must happen. As that thought came into Durand's heart, in addition to his fear and anxiety about Danusia, and his readiness to redeem her from a foe's hands, even with his own blood, he experienced a new, exceedingly bitter, and hitherto unknown feeling of humiliation. And now Durand, at the mere mention of whose name the neighboring counts trembled, was riding to their command with a bowed head. He who had defeated and trampled underfoot so many of them now felt himself defeated and trampled upon. It is true, they had not overcome him in the field with courage and knightly strength. Nevertheless, he felt himself subdued. And it was to him something so unusual that it seemed as if the entire order of the world were subverted. He was going to submit himself to the Teutons, he who would rather meet single-handed the entire Teuton force if it were not for Danusia's sake. Had it not happened already, that a single knight, having to choose between disgrace and death, had attacked whole armies? But he felt that he might meet disgrace, and at that thought his heart groaned with agony, as a wolf howls when it feels the dart within it. But he was a man with not only a body, but also a soul of iron. He knew how to subdue others. He knew also how to subdue himself. "I will not move," he said to himself, "until I have overcome this anger with which I should rather lose than deliver my child." And he wrestled with his hard heart, his inveterate hatred, and his desire to fight. Whoever had seen him on that hill, in armor, on a gigantic horse, would have said that he was some giant, wrought out of iron, and would not have recognized that that motionless knight at that moment was waging the hottest of all the battles of his life. But he fought with himself until he had entirely overcome and felt that his will would not fail him. Meanwhile, the mist thinned, although it did not disappear entirely, but finally something darker loomed through it. Durand guessed that these were the walls of the castle of Szczytno. At the sight of it, he still did not move from the place, but began to pray so fervidly and ardently as a man prays, when nothing is left for him in the world but God's mercy. And when his horse did finally move, he felt that some sort of confidence was beginning to enter his heart. He was now prepared to suffer everything that could befall him. There came back to his memory St. George, a descendant of the greatest race in Cappadocia, who suffered various shameful tortures, and nevertheless not only did not lose any honor, but is placed on the right hand of God and appointed patron of all knighthood. Durand had sometimes heard tales of his exploits from the abbots, who came from distant countries, and now he strengthened his heart with these recollections. Slowly, even, hope began to awaken in him. The Teutons were indeed famous for their desire of revenge. Therefore he did not doubt that they would take vengeance on him for all the defeats which he had inflicted upon them, for the disgrace which had fallen upon them after each encounter, and for the dread in which they had lived for so many years. But that very consideration increased his courage. He thought that they had captured Danusia only in order to get him. Therefore, of what use would she be to them after they had gotten him? Yes, they would undoubtedly seize him, and, not daring to keep him near Mazowsha, they would send him to some distant castle, where perhaps he would have to groan until his life's end underground, but they would liberate Danusia. Even if it should prove that they had got him insidiously and by oppression, neither the Grand Master nor the Assembly would blame them very much for that, because Durand was actually very hard on the Teutons, and shed more of their blood than did any other knight in the world. But that same Grand Master would perhaps punish them for the imprisonment of the innocent girl, who was moreover a foster daughter of the prince, whose favor he was seeking on account of the threatening war with the Polish king, and his hope constantly increased. At times it seemed to him almost certain that Danusia would return to Spykow under Zbyszko's powerful protection. He is a strong man, he thought. He will not permit anybody to injure her. And he began to recall with affection all he knew of Zbyszko. He defeated the Germans at Wilno, fought single-handed against the Frisians, whom he challenged with his uncle and quartered. He also beat Liechtenstein, saved the child from the wild bull, and he challenged those four whom he will surely not pardon. Here Durand raised his eyes toward heaven and said, "I gave her to you, O Lord, and you to Zbyszko." And he gained still more confidence, judging that if God had given her to the youth, then he would certainly not allow the Germans to mock him, but snatch her out of their hands, even if the entire Teuton power should oppose it. But then he commenced to think again about Zbyszko. Bah! He is not only a mighty man, but also as true as gold. He will guard her, love her, and Jesus, be good to her, but it seems to me that by his side she will neither miss the princely court nor paternal love. At that thought his eyelids became suddenly moist, and a great yearning filled his heart. He would like to see his child once more at least in his life, and at some future time die in Spykow near those two, and not in the dark Teuton cells. But God's will be done. Szczytno was already visible. The walls became more distinct in the mist. The hour of sacrifice was approaching. He therefore began to comfort himself and said to himself, "Surely it is God's will, but the end of life is near. A few years more or less, the result will be the same. Hey, I would like to see both children yet, but justly speaking, I have lived long enough. Whatever I had to experience I did, whomever to revenge I revenged. And what now? Rather to God than to the world, and since it is necessary to suffer, then it is necessary." Denusia with Zbyszko, even when most prosperous, will not forget. Surely they will sometimes recollect and ask, where is he? Is he alive yet, or already in God's court of justice? They will inquire and perhaps find out. The Teutons are very revengeful, but also very greedy for ransom. Zbyszko would not grudge ransoming the bones at least, and they will surely order more than one mass. The hearts of both are honest and loving, for which may God and the Most Holy Mother bless them. The road became not only broader but also more frequented. Wagons laden with lumber and straw were on the way to the town. Herders were driving cattle. Frozen fish were carried on sledges from the lakes. In one place, 4 archers led a peasant on a chain to court for some offense, for he had his hands tied behind him, and on his feet were fetters which, dragging in the snow, hardly enabled him to move. From his panting nostrils and mouth escaped breath in the shape of wreaths of vapor, while they sang as they urged him on. Or seeing Durand, they began to look at him inquisitively, apparently marveling at the huge proportions of the rider and horse, but, at the sight of the golden spurs and knightly belt, they lowered then crossbows as a sign of welcome and respect. The town was still more populous and noisy, but everybody hastily got out of the armed man's way, while he, traversing the main street, turned toward the castle which, wrapped in clouds, seemed to sleep yet. Not everything around slept, at least not the crows and ravens, whole flights of which were stirring on the elevation, which constituted the entrance to the castle, flapping their wings and crowing. On coming nearer, Durand understood the cause of their gathering. Beside the road leading to the gate of the castle stood wide gallows, on which were hanging the bodies of 4 Mazovian peasants. There was not the least breath of wind, therefore the corpses, which seemed to be looking at their own feet, did not sway at all, except when the black buds perched upon their shoulders and heads, jostling one another, striking the ropes and pecking the bowed heads. Some of the hanged men must have been there for a long time, because their skulls were entirely naked, and their legs very much lengthened. At Durand's approach, the flock arose with a great noise, but they soon turned in the air and began to settle on the crossbeam of the gallows. Durand passed them, crossing himself, approached the moat, and stopping at the place where the drawbridge was raised before the gate, sounded the horn. He sounded it a second and a third time, and waited. There was no living soul upon the walls, nor could a voice be heard within the gates. After a while, though, a heavy flap, visible behind a grate built in stone near the castle gate, was raised with a crash, and in the opening appeared the bearded head of a German servant. "Where da?" inquired a harsh voice. "Durand of Spykow," replied the knight. Immediately the flap was closed again, and deep silence followed. Time passed. No movement was heard behind the gate. Only the cawing of birds reached his ear from the direction of the gallows. Durand stood yet a long time before he raised the horn and sounded it again, but silence again was the sole response. Now he understood that he was kept before the gate by Teuton pride, which knew no bounds before the defeated, in order to humiliate him like a beggar. He also guessed that he would have to wait thus until evening, or even longer. Consequently, his blood began to boil in the first moments. He was suddenly seized with the desire to dismount, pick up one of the rocks which lay near the moat, and cast it at the grate. He and every other Mazovian or Polish knight would have done so, under other circumstances, and let them come then from behind the gate and fight him. But recollecting for what purpose he had come, he bethought himself and desisted. "Have I not sacrificed myself for my child?" he said in his soul, and he waited. Meanwhile something black appeared in the loopholes of the wall. There appeared heads covered with fur, dark hoods, and even iron bars, from behind which curious eyes gazed at the knight. More came every moment, because the terrible Durand, waiting solitarily before the Teuton gate, was an unusual sight for the garrison. Whoever had seen him hitherto had seen death, but now he could be looked at in safety. The heads constantly multiplied till at last all the loopholes near the gate were occupied by servants. Durand thought that also the superiors must be looking at him through the grates of the windows in the adjacent tower, and he turned his eyes in that direction. But there the windows were cut in deep walls, and it was impossible to see through them. But in the apertures, the group of people who at first looked at him silently began to talk. One after another repeated his name. Here and there laughter was heard. Gruff voices shouted as if at a wolf, louder and more insolently, and when, apparently, nobody among them interfered, they finally began to throw snow at the standing knight. He moved his horse as if involuntarily, and then for a moment the throwing of snow ceased, voices quieted down, and even some heads disappeared behind the walls. Surely Durand's name must have been very menacing. Soon, however, even the most cowardly bethought themselves that a moat and a wall separated them from that terrible Mazovian. Therefore the rough soldiery again commenced to throw not only small lumps of snow, but also ice, and even shards and stones, which rebounded with a clang from the armor which covered the horse. "I have sacrificed myself for the child," repeated Durand to himself, and he waited. Noontime arrived. The walls were deserted, because the retainers were called to dinner. A few, those that had to be on guard, ate their meal on the wall, and after having eaten, entertained themselves with throwing the picked bones at the hungry knight. They also began to tease and question each other who would dare to descend and strike him with the fist in the neck or with the handle of the lance. Others, returning from their meal, called to him that if he disliked waiting, he could hang himself, because there was a vacant hook on the gallows with a ready rope. And amidst such mockery, cries, bursts of laughter and cursing, the afternoon hours passed. The short wintry day gradually drew toward evening, and the drawbridge was still up, and the gate remained closed. But toward evening a wind arose, dispersed the mist, cleared the sky, and revealed the sunset glow. The snow became dark blue and then violet. There was no frost, but the night promised to be fair. The walls were again deserted by all but the guard. The rooks and crows departed from the gallows to the forests. Finally the sky darkened, and complete silence followed. "They will not open the gate before nightfall," thought Durand, and for a moment he thought to return to the city, but he soon gave up that idea. "They want me to stand here," he said to himself. "If I return, they will certainly not let me go home, but surround and capture me, and then they will say that they owe me nothing, because they took me by force, and if I should ride over them, even then I must return." The great endurance of the Polish knights for cold, hunger, and hardships, so admired by foreign chroniclers, frequently enabled them to perform deeds which the less hardy people from the West could not undertake. Durand possessed that endurance to a still greater degree than others. Therefore, although hunger had long since began to gripe him, and the evening frost penetrated his fur, which was covered with iron plates, he determined to wait, even if he had to die before this gate. But suddenly, before it became entirely dark, he heard behind him the sound of footsteps in the snow. He looked back. There were coming toward him, from the direction of the city, 6 men, armed with lances and halberds. In their midst walked a 7th man, supporting himself on a weapon. "They will perhaps open the gate for them, and then I shall ride in with them," thought Durand. "They will not try to take me by force, nor kill me, because there are too few. Should they attack me, however, it will prove that they do not mean to keep their promise, and then woe to them." Thus thinking, he raised the steel axe hanging at his saddle, so heavy that its weight was too great for the 2 hands of an ordinary man, and moved toward them. But they did not think of attacking him. On the contrary, the servants planted their lances and halberds in the snow, and as the night was not entirely dark yet, Durand saw that the handles somewhat trembled in their hands. The 7th, who appeared to be the superior, put out his left arm quickly, and turning his hand upward, said, "Are you the Knight Durand of Spykow?" "Yes. Do you wish to hear my message?" "I listen." "The powerful and religious Count von Danveld ordered me to tell you, Lord, that until you dismount, the gate will not be opened for you." Durand remained motionless for a while. Then he dismounted. the horse being instantly taken away by one of the archers. "The arms must be surrendered to us," again said the man with the weapon. The Lord of Spykow hesitated. Perhaps they would attack him unarmed and kill him like a beast, or capture and cast him underground. But after a moment he thought that if it were to be so, they would have sent more men. But should they throw themselves on him, they would not destroy his armor at once, and then he could wrench a weapon from the nearest and kill them all before assistance could arrive. They knew him well. "And even if they should wish to shed my blood," he said to himself, "I came for no other purpose than that." Thus thinking, he threw down first the axe, then the sword, and finally the misericordia, and waited. They took everything, and then the man who had addressed him previously, withdrawing several steps, stopped and began to speak in an insolent, loud voice. "For all the wrongs you have done to the order, you must, by the Count's orders, put on this sackcloth which I leave here, tie around your neck the scabbard of your sword with a rope, and wait humbly at the gate until the Count's grace orders it to be opened for you." And the next moment Durand remained alone in the darkness and silence. In the snow before him the penitential robe and rope showed black, while he stood long, feeling something in his soul dissolving, breaking, agonizing, dying, and that shortly he would be a knight no more, Durand of Spykow no more, but a beggar, a slave without a name, without fame, without respect. Therefore, a long time passed before he approached the penitential robe and said, "How can I do otherwise? Christ, thou knowest they will kill the innocent child if I do not do all they order, and thou also knowest that I would not do that for the sake of my own life. Disgrace is a distasteful thing, distasteful, but thou also wast disgraced of old. Well then, in the name of the Father and of the Son." He then bent down, put on the robe, in which were cut the openings for the head and hands. Then he tied around his neck the scabbard of his sword, and dragged himself to the gate. He did not find it open, but now it was immaterial to him whether they opened it sooner or later. The castle sank into nocturnal silence. Only the guards called now and then to each other on the bastions. In the tower near the gate there was light in one window high up, the others were dark. The night hours flew one after another. On the sky appeared the crescent moon, and threw light upon the gloomy walls of the castle. It became so quiet that Durand was able to hear his own heartbeats. But he stiffened and became entirely petrified, as if his soul were taken from him, and took no account of anything. One thought remained with him, that he had ceased to be a knight, Durand of Spykow, but what he was he did not know. Sometimes it also seemed to him that in the middle of the night death was coming to him across the snow from those hanged men that he had seen in the morning. Suddenly he quivered and awoke entirely. "O gracious Christ, what is that?" From the high window in the adjacent tower, the sounds of a lute, hardly heard at first, reached his ear. Durand, while on the way to Szczytno, was sure that Danusia was not in the castle, and yet this sound of the lute at night aroused his heart in an instant. It seemed to him that he knew those sounds, and that nobody else was playing but she, his child, his darling. He therefore fell upon his knees, clasped his hands to pray, and listened shivering as in a fever. Just then a half-childish and as if ardently longing voice began to sing, "Had I the dear little wings of a gosling, I would fly to Jasiek at Slonsk." Durand wished to reply, to utter the dear name, but his words were imprisoned in his throat, as if an iron band squeezed them. A sudden wave of pain, tears, longing, suffering collected in his breast. He therefore cast himself down with his face in the snow, and began in ecstasy to call upon heaven in his soul, as if in thankful prayer. "O Jesus, I hear my child once again, O Jesus!" And weeping began to tear his gigantic body. Above, the longing voice continued to sing amid the undisturbed silence of the night. "Would that I might sit in the little Slonsk garden, to gaze upon little Jasiek, the poor orphan." In the morning, a stout, bearded German retainer began to prod the ribs of the knight lying at the gate. "Upon your feet, dog. The gate is open, and the Count orders you to appear before him." Durand awoke as if from sleep. He did not catch the man by the throat. He did not crush him in his iron hands. He had a quiet and almost humble face. He arose, and without saying a word, followed the soldier through the gate. He had hardly crossed when a clang of chains was heard, and the bridge began to be drawn up again, while in the gateway itself fell a heavy iron grating. End of Part 4th. Part 5th.
Remember to subscribe.